5 minutes, just a minute, because we haven't got a lot on progress and outcomes, luckily. And school place planning, we're going to do 15 to 20 minutes. I know it's quite a popular subject, but it is also appearing at corporate scrutiny next week, so I don't want to labour the point. We do have some questions that have been asked. Youth provision, 20 minutes. Thank you, Oliver and Benson, for attending. School transport, 15 minutes. We'll swap items 9 and 10 around. So it'll be 25 on annual complaints and 15 to 20 on otherwise start for life. And then 20 minutes could conclude the work plan and members' question times. Everyone okay with that? Yes, good. Glad no one's arguing. So apologies and changes in membership.
We have apologies from Councillor Adams this evening, and we have Councillor Outlaw substituting for Councillor Ellis.
Welcome too. Is everyone happy to confirm the previous minutes for a true and accurate representation? Do I have it? Yes, there we go. Thank you very much. Need a seconder, or you've got that? There we go. Any declarations of interest?
I'm Chair of Governors at Holy Cross Catholic Primary School and a Governor at Queensgate Foundation Primary School.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Marvellous. So, public question time. We do have one written question which I'll read out and read the answer to, and then we do have a question from Simon Richards. So, Simon, do you want to quickly just turn your microphone on and off and make sure it's working for us so you're not waiting? There we go. Yeah, just click it off again. Thank you. So, written question from Mrs. Helen Downer to the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Lifelong Skills. Why, instead of closing schools, can the space not be used for renting to other childcare providers? This would lower costs for them and bring income into the schools. It would also make it easier for parents to drop off and pick up from one location. The response is, at present, the Isle of Wight Council are only due to consult on the closure of Chillerton and Ruckley Primary School, to be achieved through the amalgamation of Godshill Primary School and Chillerton and Ruckley Primary School. Within this area, there is not currently a demand for additional childcare provision. A number of schools across the island do currently lease part of their school sites to early years providers or utilise part of the school site to manage an early years provision as part of the school. Should there be a demand for additional childcare provision in areas across the island, the local authority will consider any potential capacity within school sites. So luckily we have someone that can have direct contact with Mrs. Helen Downer. So I suggest that we check that Mrs. Helen Downer is happy with that response, and if not, ask another question at a further date. Thank you. Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Councillor Quigley. On this first anniversary of my presentation to this committee, alongside head teachers on the subject of school place planning, I am disappointed that nothing has changed except the closure of a school with no pupils and staff and the destabilisation of 3 schools now facing uncertainty. I am here to listen to the verbal update on school place planning, but I'm not optimistic given the current administration's failure to make strategic decisions on this matter. What influence can this committee bring to bear on Cabinet to ensure that immediate progress is made on this matter that has been evidenced as so detrimental to the improvement of educational standards for our island's young people?
Okay, so just so I'm clear, the question is what happens next? Would that be fair?
That would be fair. I don't see the point in asking a question for the Cabinet Member. I've not been able to get straight answers from the Cabinet Member in previous meetings. So I'm asking this committee, what can they do? What powers do they have to make sure this is moved forward? Because nothing has happened.
It's a good question. I must admit, I won't pretend to give you an answer that says I have any particular powers, other than the reason that the item is on the agenda is that we share your frustration. I don't know if a Cabinet Member or Council want to respond at this time. Please feel free, any other Cabinet members, to add to anything that may help Mr. Richards. Anybody got anything?
Sorry, I don't know if this is allowed right now, but I was just gonna, because Mr. Richards sounds like he's got a specific solutions in mind. Maybe I was just, because I wasn't on this committee, I don't think when Mr. Richards last presented, I was just keen to understand what maybe he's wanting to see that perhaps hasn't been delivered yet.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I think just to put that in context, then a year ago, myself and primary head teachers, came along and presented about the devastating impact of the oversurplus of school places in our system, and that this needed to be addressed as part of a solution to raise standards for young people. We evidenced that there there is capacity to close several primary schools on the island to reduce down the number of surplus places without impacting on the parental choice aspects of school provision, and still to allow a reasonable capacity for movement of children from school to school when it's the right thing to do. Since that meeting, which is sort of about a year ago now, we've had a proposal to close 4 schools, one of which has happened. Chillerton Rookley, yes, has now amalgamated with Godshill and is no longer operating as a school. But the 3 others, that proposal came towards Cabinet but got pulled before it got to the meeting. Nothing further has happened since then. We've had a public briefing, which I don't think moved anything forward. And we are now in the situation where, a year on, another cohort of children have now joined a school system with so much overcapacity. There are some schools that have had single-digit entries this September against a pan of 60. That is unviable. Those schools are very soon going to become financially unviable, and some are. If I could direct you to look at the Papers for Schools Forum, there you will see projections of how many schools are at risk of falling into substantial deficit in the next 2 years. And it is substantial. It is sort of, I think 60–70% of schools, of primary schools, could be in that situation in 2 years' time. And that deficit falls to the council because they're maintaining schools, but nothing is happening. So all that's happening is the can's being kicked down the road, and we're continuing to fail young people and children. And I'd like us to have a little bit of impetus to start considering what those options are. I fully accept that closing schools is not easy, it's not popular, but by not making those decisions, we are failing our children.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very clear. And you did make very clear, along with the head teachers when you represented last year, what you expected to happen. So effectively a concrete plan of what, where and how. Okay. So that's for us to put pressure on committee. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Okay, item 5, progress on outcomes and recommendations from previous meetings. So there's only one item. We aren't missing anything else. And that was Councillor Downer raised a question on the works at Wroxall Primary School and was advised a written response would be received, and the written response has been circulated. So we're up to date. So on to the excitement of the day. Item 6, school place planning. Is that you, Mr. Ashley? Well, it's up to you. I don't mind. Don't fight over it.
Oh, do you want me to answer the questions that the committee have raised?
You can go to the questions.
It just gives clarity, I hope. So the first question was why has school place planning been handled incorrectly in the timing and naming of schools? So I say we recognise that the process to date could have been handled better. There was adherence to existing statutory guidance, but it is clear that an issue of this importance that we need to go over and above the basic requirements set up for communication and information sharing. The reason that schools were named is this is required as told to us by the LGA, Hampshire and the Department for Education. You have to name schools in a consultation. The second question is about the criteria for selecting schools and why it wasn't clear. And I absolutely agree with that item. The criteria was not made clear, but since taking over this role, I have inquired and contacted officers to ask for a far more detailed rationale relating to choice of schools. So we are bound by DfE specifications. I understand that heads and governors were contacted in advance of that notice. The third question is why was communication not handled more sensitively? Already I've accepted better and I've apologised. I will be speaking with heads in the next few days. And subsequent to that, announcing a process of engagement with all stakeholders prior to taking forward any future formal process. And I hope that the committee will respect that I really need to speak to the heads direct without announcing anything this evening until I've actually had that chance to personally engage with them. Thank you.
Okay. Stuart, do you have anything to add at all? Don't feel you have to.
I appreciate it's been a difficult issue for Cabinet, for members, for the public, and for everybody. But I have to say this, I'm duty bound to say it. As the Director of Children's Services, my unrelenting focus is on improving outcomes for children. And so this issue, one way or another, will need to be tackled by Isle of Wight Council. And I think there is, everything I've heard is, there's an acknowledgement across the system that that needs to happen. And I'll say this, my last words will be, I think it needs to happen at pace now. The financial risk to the council for the schools is a challenge in itself. But the most important thing is that children have a well-rounded education. And that's what we need to focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions at all from committee? Councillor Stewart.
Focusing on to the future, we agree that it's been handled interestingly. And I think we can also say that the island community doesn't feel that it's been engaged. So will the council agree that any school place planning criteria should now be developed by the island community and then released to the public so that we understand what is going on? And that should include heads, teachers, governors, teaching staff, parents, and town and parish and community councils. Thank you.
I'll just come back quickly. That is answered in item 3, where it says, after I've spoke to the heads, I will subsequently be announcing a process of engagement with all stakeholders prior to taking forward any future process.
Any further questions? Councillor Lever.
Again, and I've made this point before, but and it's not really a question. I appreciate everything Stuart and Councillor PC Wilcox have said about the process. Now I think we do have to get on with it. It's vital. However, I just thinking long term, I don't want to see us back here talking about the same things over and over again in years to come. School closures might have to happen in the short term, that's fine, but what I don't want to see is the Isle of Wight getting to a place where we've got a handful of schools left in the most populous areas and everywhere else, essentially, because it creates further problems down the line, right? Transport to schools, everybody's got to move to. So what I just want to see something long term, what we're doing instead of just managing decline, how we're turning this around. I think that's probably means involving government and asking for changes to funding models, because at the moment that means small rural schools just can't survive essentially with what we've got at the moment.
It's a good point, the sort of the future and a long-term strategy. What I've learned in this role is that it swings and roundabouts. So the population now, child population is very low. That's why we're seeing such low numbers on primary roll. That will change. Of course, that will feed through to secondary at some point. And secondary will go through a period of adjustment. What you can't do is simply keep closing schools, because at some point population will rise. We predict in 7-8 years that populations will rise again. And so you then, what do you do with all those children? So you have to try to, the best way, manage the market. So you ask some schools to take a few extra, but the difficulty is those small rural schools. This is a national challenge. It's not just an Isle of Wight challenge, but the island is small and it's rural. So it's a particular challenge. And you have to have a system that's fit for the future. And so unfortunately, some schools will have to close. But that should mean that there's a greater resilience across the education system on the island.
Any further questions? Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like a reassurance, in effect, that what has happened recently, that heads and schools have early communication about if they're going to be consulting on closure, because it's not fair on the people, and there was a lot of consternation. So really, it's only fair that they should be consulted early. Thank you.
So again, I want to put words into the mouth of my committee, but I think the resolution is that we really do need to see a short-term plan that has some pace. And we really do realise that we're going to have a new director of children's services, so I appreciate that it will be affected by that, but also that the long-term plan needs to take into account potential partial recovery in children numbers, but also needs to include the consultation with existing heads. So we do have a very clear plan. It's just in terms of make sure it happens. So that's our job, to make sure we see that. And I think, like you say, Councillor Levy, we don't want to be here even this time next year. It needs to be resolved by then. Okay, our star guests. Welcome, Oliver. Welcome, Benson. Youth provision. I'm allowing 20 minutes for this because you're the ones that'll be paying our pensions. So on you go.
Both Oliver and I are honoured to be invited to this meeting to represent the Youth Council, but also to speak about a topic that's so important for young people on the island. I'll hand over to Oliver, who's going to talk about what provisions young people wish to access.
So naturally, I can't speak for absolutely every young person going across the whole island because there's a few too many for me to consult. But I can speak for those who I have consulted, even if in completely different circumstances. So I worked with a group called Sandown and Lake Youth Forum, which was facilitated by Community Action Isle of Wight. And the young people, when they had there working on their projects, were consulted about provisions they'd like. I think that had something to do with this committee, I'm going to be honest, but my memory is awful. And obviously, as from that, we had a lot, well, what we thought, we don't know, you know, is it going to happen? Is it not? And now it's happening. We've had the youth centre in Sandown approved. And from what I gather, that's the kind of thing a lot young people would like to see more of. So youth centres, but not the way they were originally. So I think a lot of the problem with youth centres was the regimented style they had that was very similar actually to schools, which was what a lot of young people, I imagine, would be wanting to avoid, or at least get away from something different and try and enjoy themselves. So one of the main things we've had from prior consultation is a social space. So oddly enough, what we had more of as a social space was that people like the idea of like a coffee shop. So somewhere you can go down, sit down and chat. I mean, I'm not saying we should, you know, make young people only coffee clubs and the rest of it. But it gives you an idea of what people are asking for. And the other thing I'd just like to really iterate as, you know, I think is really important is versatility of space. So as much as social spaces are important, we need to look at other things. So well-being for young people. What else can we use this space for? Could it be used for sports, for instance? Could it be used for creative art, something along those lines? What else can we get out of this space? For instance, a communal kitchen was something we talked about having. So you can teach young people culinary skills, and you can also run a coffee shop, for instance, out of that. So you've got a bit of versatility. I'm now going to pass back over to Benson.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I'm going to talk about what do the Youth Council see as problems in accessing youth provisions. The main problem, and this problem comes up whenever we talk about any subject, and at our Youth Council meetings, it is constantly uprearing its head, and that is transport. For a number of different reasons. Price, obviously we've been very fortunate with the capping scheme, which will run to the end of October. Capping prices at £2, but £2 is still expensive. You know, that's £4 to get from and back. That's still expensive for families, and that's still expensive for young people. And frequency is another thing, because often if people live in rural areas and they struggle to access things, the buses don't help that. You know, often you've got 5 buses a day, and they're at times that aren't sociable for young people. It's just not practical. Unpredictability as well. There's times when people miss the bus or something, and then there's not another one for a long time, and then they miss out on a social outlet, which is really, really horrible for them. And time. Buses take a long time to get to destinations, and if you're getting home from school and you've got to get ready and drop your bags off and have dinner perhaps, and then you're going out to a youth club, often it can be way into the night before you get there or you're back. It's just, again, it's not practical. And that comes into the solution for transport. I believe that minibuses should be put in place for youth provisions. I think funding should be focused on that. either that or subsidised bus fares and transport fares. I think it's so hard for young people to be able to get out of their bedrooms, get out of their house, because they have got that problem where they can't easily access transport in a lot of cases. I mean, I know young people, we've consulted a group called Sway, which is South Wight Area Youth, and they operate between Ventnor and Bryston on the Isle of Wight, and all of them, the main problem is transport. They can't get to the social activities that they run, and they severely want more minibuses and more support. We asked a question at the last full council meeting about school minibuses and what happens to them during the holidays and whether they could be rented out to these sort of groups so that they could be driven between the services. I don't know what the council thinks about that. It would be very interesting to hear if anyone's got a suggestion about it. But it would be so crucial, and it makes such a difference for young people to access the provisions that they at the moment just can't. Another thing is social anxieties. COVID and the sort of wake that's given us has been really hard on young people, and that's led to people being isolated and being lonely. 48% of young people on the island have said that they felt terribly alone or isolated, and that's a statistic that I think could be massively lowered by introducing more youth provisions that are accessible. And it does come into how you make people come along, and the promotion is obviously very important. There are many different services on the island that offer a very good youth provision. They offer youth centres and different activities, but many young people don't know about them, and that must mean that there's something going wrong. There's some kind of line of communication that just isn't there. We want to make sure that young people don't have to sit on their own all day and wonder when they're going to see a fellow young person again. We want to make sure that they're able to go out and have an outlet, because young people often say there's nothing to do on the island. And I try and say, actually, there are things to do, but I now realise that for many young people, there's not. And not having that social activity, not having that area they can go to, that they're safe and that they know there's going to be a friendly face is really, really difficult. So I think for mental health, it's so important that we try to find a solid solution to this. And in terms of solutions, I've talked about the minibuses. I think in terms of volunteers, I understand that every community on the island, it's just not practical for there to be a youth centre in every one of those areas, because it would be very poorly resourced, I imagine, and it would be much better to have hubs on, I don't say, for example, 5 hubs on the island where young people can get to easily using transport that's either subsidised or there's minibuses that they can use. And I really do think that will help, because volunteers, especially that run these services, typically, they don't grow on trees. You need really good, dedicated support. And what we don't want to see is some half-hearted effort where for one reason or another, there's not enough volunteers or there's not enough money behind it, because it sort of defeats the object of putting it on. And another final thing for solutions is making sure that there's disability access throughout. And that's not just the location, the versatile sort of location we're talking about, but it's also throughout the travel, throughout the transport, making sure that actually it's not discriminating against someone and not allowing someone to access it because it's hard and there's steps or something. Just being very considerate about what we need as young people, and what you can offer as well. And we're not coming here to say we need youth centres everywhere. We know that's not possible. But what we want is really versatile spaces that young people can do a range of different activities, but most importantly, an area that they can socialise. And I think that's something that's really lacking on the island at the moment. Thank you very much. Anything else?
Sorry, just quickly to add, Benson says there aren't many things for young people. Now, I agree, but I don't think we're saying that there aren't many activities going on. There are lots of things going on. One of the main problems is, well, they're not very well advertised. But the other one is, I don't think you're going to find someone under 18 at like a beer and cheese festival, for instance. And sadly, those kind of events seem to be a lot more common on the island. things I would suggest from my background as a musician, more music venues, things like that. I'm not going to say, let's build another strings right now, magic that money up, but putting on, or at least encouraging more events similar to that, something that's a bit more appealing to young people. And as well, if there is a music event on, not many young people like bands like the Beatles is the other sad truth, I think. I mean, I may be an exception, as I'm sure Phil Jordan will back me up on.
Thank you, Faye. If everybody made a presentation like that to all of our committees with very clear what needs to happen next, it'd make our lives a lot easier. I will open it up to questions in a moment, and then I'll come back to you for a final question at the end. But there's just a few things within what you said, and I was lucky enough to be at the Isle Access film presentation of the night, which, if those of you who haven't seen it, as soon as that is made available, a link, I will forward it to you all. Gives a very chilling and entertaining recollection of 6 individuals that have gone through his problem and experienced quite horrendous loneliness, and the project takes them out of themselves, and you can see what can be done with a small amount of effort. The statistic that 48% of children are identified as being lonely should chill us all, really, because the knock-on effect is very expensive in terms of, and I don't need to tell anybody on that side of the room this at all. I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but it should really be a call to action, because we do spend a lot of time setting up cheese and cider festivals and beer and buses and things for people, Joe's age, older. But we don't do a lot because we see it's not a young island, and I think we're making a big mistake. Now, you're not asking for anything that didn't used to exist when I was your age. So we don't have to reinvent it, other than the activities such as getting your shoes really polished and throwing a beanbag probably aren't what you want anymore. And you're quite right to highlight that we shouldn't have, old people telling the youth of today what they want. I will open it to questions, and then we'll come back to you, because what I really would like is if we can come up with some sort of resolution moving forward from this. I know it's not easy because it requires resource, time and everything else, but it'd be good if we could have something to move forward. Any questions? Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both. You spoke really well. What engagement have you had with town and parish councils about providing youth provisions? Because my fear is when we come to Isle of Wight Council, we move quite slowly to get things done, and we already have budgetary constraints, which we have. Whereas town and parish councils, they can pretty much raise their precepts as much as they need. So what engagement have you had with them? And I don't believe you've spoken to East Council, Town Council, so it'd be very good if you come and present to us as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we're very open to speak to town councils. In truth, we haven't spoken to many, and it would be lovely to meet with them, whether they come along to our meetings or meet with us, or we go along to them. And I have heard actually that I think you're right in terms of the proactivity and the means to do it and to provide that service. It's perhaps more available within town councils. So yeah, it would be really nice to speak to you and get in contact.
So on that, it's really down to us to facilitate making sure that happens. Because if we leave this room and go, yeah, just go and talk to parish councils, you've got, I don't know, many other islands, 16 is there, more town and parish councils, 33, there you go. Do we have a method to facilitate that?
You can simply go to IWAC. That covers 85–90% of the town and parish and community councils. You can talk to them. They will give you time. If you speak as well as you have done today, they'll try and recruit you anyway, but they'll certainly listen.
So how do we get in touch with IWALC, which is IWALC, which is the Isle of Wight Association of Local Councils, am I correct? Yeah. And that should have a representative somewhere or other of every parish council. Benson.
If I could just ask, so is that an online forum that you can chat to them, or is it?
There is an online meeting, which
typical
is probably worse than going to an old-fashioned youth club.
So with all of them, so it's a meeting with all of them.
Yeah, I think it's probably an idea to speak to Councillor Stewart at some point. Again, you don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting, because even I struggle sometimes. So, but it would be an idea to speak to Councillor Stewart to to find out what the best method is to make sure you contact all of them. Because it may be that you only have to attend one meeting rather than 33.
And this is the thing, which I was just thinking about the resource constraints that we have as a youth council and getting round to all of them. So if we can get to one meeting that's got most of them, that would be really preferable.
Okay, so if we could do that, any other questions? Okay, so we've got part resolution. Oliver and Benson, what would you like to happen next?
I think what would be really nice is to really look in for the council to really look into some funding that could be available. We were talking on the way actually about the positive consequence that this would have on mental health and well-being for young people. They're often looking for bids that actually encompass that within the project and within the aims. So I wonder if the council could really have a look around at what's available. And also being able to go to the town councils, it would be really good to get an idea of actually what they can give us and what they can offer. But really, we need to make sure that it's meaningful. And I have said, I've said about it being under-resourced, and it does defeat the object if it is under-resourced. So we do need to find a way, a plan that means that there are really good quality services being offered on the island.
Can I make a suggestion? And please, anybody in the room, correct me if I'm wrong. But if you engage with IWOG to start with, so you've made that contact, and then rather than asking them questions, is tell them what you want to happen. So you mentioned 5 hubs. So if you can come up with a fairly rough, well, as detailed as you like plan, and then tell them what they need to do, because people like to solve problems, especially with us people's money. And the parish council, to be fair, do have access to more cash than the county council. So, but if you do need help with that, then as a committee, we're able to help. Anything else you need from us?
Should have mentioned it at the beginning, really. And we've just realised we forgot to. Now, we were in one of our council meetings the other day, and we were talking about what youth provisions we did have on the island, and something came up about a youth bus. Now, we only heard of it, none of us have, interacted with it in any way, and apparently it's not knocking around anymore. I don't know if anyone has any idea as to what happened to it or what it was.
I was on the town council at the time, and it ended up being down at Bridge Road. Yeah, that bus. So yeah, there was a youth council bus. It was an old double decker that they converted so that you could use it. It just became derelict and not used. There was a lot of trouble around there with drink and drugs and kids kicking off. So that's why that youth bus. But I think it was funded maybe through the churches or that sort of organisation. I've just given them the contact number for Jill Webster, who is the clerk for the IWELC people. She will facilitate for you to be able to go there and do that, okay?
The bus wasn't mobile though, it was fixed in one place. Bus wasn't mobile, it didn't move around the island, it was in one position.
So we were told of one, and I'm sure this is because I've heard very fond memories about it, and it's a sort of single decker bus that was kitted out with lots of different, wasn't a bus. I think it was like a single decker bus more than a double, and it was mobile. It might have taken more of a form of a lorry, but they called it a bus.
Was it taken legally?
It was completely legal. But what it offered actually was rural communities. It went round to rural communities on the island and allowed people to interact with each other.
We'll see if we can. It doesn't ring any bells for me. Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, thank you very much for your presentation, gentlemen. Now, this is not council related, but it's about church bell ringing. Have you ever thought in that line? The Isle of Wight is one of the districts of the Winchester and Portsmouth Diocesan Guild of Church Bell Ringers. Bell ringing is a physical activity, but it's also a mental activity, and it's a good social life. If you want to get in touch with me, I can put you in touch with other people. Thank you. I do apologise for taking up council time.
That's fine, Councillor Downer. Can't beat a bit of mental bell ringing. Brilliant. Thank you. Anything else at all? Don't feel you have to at all. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you do need to get back and do anything else, please feel free to shuffle away. Thank you both as well very much. I did thoroughly enjoy that actually, and I can't wait for the link for the film from Our Axis to come out, because I think that really does hit home very hard.
One last thing, it just reminds me, films. Has anyone watched the film that was produced by Sandown Lake Youth Forum do something different. I know, obviously, you came along to the premiere, and yes, you were in it. But has anyone else seen this or even heard of it? Is there any way for us to circulate this round? Because, yeah, thank you, because this is,
Action for councillor Andre.
thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you both. Okay, item 8, school transport. Who's got the joy of school transport? Aha.
Myself will be presenting that, and Ashley's just going to put some slides on the screen to take you through the report that you've had circulated with you in advance.
Good evening, everybody. Suzanne and I split this presentation, so I'll start it off and she will finish it, and also then have the call for support in terms of what's required in terms of support. So for those of you that read the report, the context around this is that over a 10-year period, we've seen a kind of change in the demand for school transport in terms of the pupil cohorts and also the costs. So I think it's worth calling out at this point, there's been significant activity to actually contain those costs and manage those costs through what we call commissioning, through the tendering of those contracts. There's some distinct differences in terms of the way the demand for mainstream and children with special education needs behaves, which is really highlighted within that report, and those young people in the post-16 cohort. I think it's important that we actually briefly explore those in the presentation, because actually that is the key driver in where the cost differences are. I think also it's fair to say that actually cost containment itself, longer term, is really difficult to achieve without actually statutory policy change. But at the same time, we do have some operational ideas for savings proposals that flow through the report, which do help to, I'll use the word very carefully, curb some of that spend, which is highlighted in the ideas and proposals which are in the report and presentation. As far as background for school transport, there's a duty for local authorities to kind of provide that. So that's free of charge for eligible children. So that's mainstream children that's been generally governed by distance, and for children with special education needs, depending on what those needs are, and that's part of their EHCP, their education and healthcare plan. As far as the cost differences and what's changed over that 10-year period, we had significant legislation changes in 2014. So that was the introduction of EHCPs and the abolition of learning and difficulty assessments. So why is that relevant to this presentation? What that did was actually that made a whole cohort of children eligible for transport, which wouldn't have been, and that's the 19 to 25-year groups, which some of you are nodding your heads. So that was a key change. We also saw a change in that period with the change in catchment areas and also the introduction of the Island Preschool. So those things are combined have had changes through that time period. What we've also seen is a reduction in the number of pupils travelling on transport. So that's attributed to change in the catchment areas and the introduction of the Island Preschool over that 10-year period. And we've also seen a change in the costs, which you would expect. I actually think that when we look at the changes in costs, 3.6 to 4.3 million in the last financial year, if we take into account inflation, the actual cost containment has been relatively successful, especially in the mainstream sector, and the contracts are sub-effectors. The changes in pupil numbers and cohorts basically are the key kind of driver here. And this graph really breaks down each of those cohorts. So that's quite difficult to see on that screen. It's in the report, but what I'll do is I'll lift this high level. In terms of mainstream pupils, we've seen a drop from 1,900 to 1,100 over that period. But the key thing for you to take away on this one is it's actually SEN pupils have doubled, and post-16 pupils in that time period have increased by 1.5 times. And they are the key things that we need to hold on to in terms of this conversation and what's driving those cost pressures. Likewise, when we look at the costs of the cohorts of children across the sector, this slide really looks at actually those annual costs. Well, I've talked about those already, but if we start to look at the unit costs, it really starts to play out. So with the mainstream sector, we've managed to contain costs increase of 17% over the 10-year period, which actually is quite remarkable when you think how the market has moved in that time, and also what we're seeing through COVID and the increase in cost of fuel and the cost of living. So I think that's something to be recognised within the committee. But conversely, SEN and post-16 has actually doubled over that period, and that's being driven by demand, and that's being driven by the growth in the EHCPs, and then the relative knock-on effect to those children that are eligible for transport. So it, as the opening of the presentation, it's difficult in itself to contain that spend without some form of statutory change from central government. In terms of the reason for those rising costs, and if we could kind of like to summarise at this point, there's a shortage of places in dedicated SEND schools. So what does that mean? That means that actually we often have to send children actually travel further away, which is increased costs. There's a lack of capacity on the Isle of Wight for actually in the small transport market. We've got approximately 40 providers on what we call the dynamic purchasing system that actually that we can call upon. There are more, and we're doing our best to actually increase that competition, but that also kind of like perpetuates the issue. The island has the 5th highest number of children with EHCPs in the UK. So once again, we're dealing with a demand issue. And some of our dependency on small vehicles is once again geographically sensitive, and it's around the road structure and the access to some of the schools where we actually can't use larger vehicles. Children with SEND will also need vehicles that are often more adapted, so that obviously that reduces our pool of vehicles that we can call upon. And as I've talked about, the inflationary pressures, cost of living, and what we've seen the changes in the cost in fuel over this time has also compounded the kind of increases costs in that sector. So I'm going to hand you over to Suzanne now. She's going to kind of continue with the presentation.
I guess the backward looking bit is and how I'd kind of summarise it is that in mainstream transport terms, I think we're doing pretty well. You know, kind of relative to what's happening in the market and inflation and various things like that. SEN is causing those pressures, and the forecast increase continues to increase. You know, I think you've all seen the numbers around EHCPs and what's likely to happen with that. That is going to be mirrored into the school transport environment. So we'll continue to see those costs rise. And I know when you look at the council's budgets, you will spot that there are overspends in school transport. So you quite rightly say, right, what are you going to do to try and manage that? We've done quite a bit. The Southern Vectors contract is a really good example, but we've got other things that we're doing around ensuring that all our routes are optimised, using technology to support us with that. We've come up with some other ideas. Spend to save minibuses is one that we've got a couple of places on the island that use, but are there other schools that could utilise those schemes and save money? So we've got a list of about 6 or 7 things that we are going to explore to try and support, I guess, the increasing spend. But I need to be really, really clear that won't bring us to a balanced position. We are operating at a statutory minimum, so there's or we're very close to a statutory minimum. There's 1 or 2 changes we could make in policy terms, and then we would be at statutory minimum. So then beyond that, there's nothing more that you can do from that perspective. So then if we move on to, okay, so what's the answer to this tricky problem? Ashley said at the beginning, it is going to be, I believe, impossible to solve this problem without statutory change. We need support from central government to either reflect the increased demand, costs that have come through to councils, or to change the statutory context. And what we would suggest to government, and indeed we have, is that responsibility for transport policy is delegated to a local level, because we can then take account of our demographics. We can introduce things like means testing, so that those families that can afford to make a contribution can make that contribution, and we use our council funding to support those who can't and are more vulnerable. But we also need help from government with reinforcing the fact that actually it's parents' responsibility in most cases to take their children to school. And of course, we want to support children who are very vulnerable, who have significant additional needs. But we're finding a real change and increase in parental expectations around transport that again is driving both demand and cost. Let me just skip over that because I think we've covered everything. So just in terms of recommendations to this committee, we felt it important to bring this so that you had early sight of the fact that there is an issue today, but there's an issue that will continue to grow. We would seek kind of support from the committee and the council in any way that it sees fit to recognise and seek government recognition of the link between the growth in EHCPs and the pressures that we're seeing on high needs block and how that plays through into transport, and also to urge government to look again at the statutory requirements on local authorities in relation to school transport, such that we can actually put in place a policy that would allow us to operate within budget. that's the conclusion of, that's a very brief summary of what's described in much fuller detail in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Suzanne. Again, a very detailed report. Just for clarification, it said 5th highest EHCPs. Is that in terms of actual numbers or in per 100 or 1,000 pupils?
It's proportionately.
Okay, right, okay. I won't. 5 doesn't go high enough up the scale for me to worry about. Okay, I mean, disappointingly, is this all comes down to basically finding a way to stop as many people using the service, and I understand that's where you are, and that's government's fault. I'll open to questions, but as we have 2 members from the Youth Council, I will actually allow questions from both of you, should you wish to have any. Do we have any questions on school transport? You might get away scot-free with this one. You might be okay. Councillor Lever.
Okay, sorry, I'm not even sure it's a question because I'm just trying to mull this over as I was listening to that. I think part of me is a little bit concerned that we potentially move into framing this situation that send children are an issue for us, which we absolutely shouldn't be doing that. So I was a little bit concerned. Part of me as well, I can't remember what it said, the statement around parents expecting us to handle transport. I understand that, but at the same time, and this ties into what I was talking about earlier about longer term strategy, we're closing schools. Transport, unless we're expecting everybody to move into the most populous areas, is only going to get worse. And so therefore, if we're expecting parents to take up the slack, that means more vehicles on our roads, essentially. So is it not? Okay. That's where we seem to be going at the moment, though.
Please clarify, please.
Yeah. I mean, as a few points, I'll bring Suzanne in. She's the expert. Two points from me. I mean, I think the first thing is the public have to understand that if we're not given the money from central government, how does the council provide the transport? And it's not about SEN children, quite the opposite. Very happy to support them with transport, but we have to be funded for it. There simply is no funding. My equivalent in Leicester has no home to school transport budget. Doesn't need it. Public transport's there, children go and use a bus. In rural areas, such as we experience on the island and in Hampshire, it's a real issue, and it's not going to go away. It's going to get worse, and it tends to affect large shire counties and small rural authorities the most. And I suppose the question is that fair? Should we be funded differently? There's also a thing as well about parents' expectations. It isn't a universal service, yet somehow everybody assumes it is a universal service and that we should have the right to school transport. Again, I'm very happy to provide a universal service, but it's got to be funded. And it just is, and it's that issue. So what we've seen is a perfect storm, a large increase in a cohort who can have be described as having special education needs. And you have to question whether that's right as well. And then, of course, you have the reduction of funding for councils. So it's right and proper that you sort of say there's a challenge here. It is a national issue, though. I really do not understand why government won't give in over the let us determine local policy. If this council then chooses to broaden its transport policy, it can do so and fund it accordingly. But having it determined centrally doesn't work. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd say I completely stop by saying I recognise the points you're making. I can totally understand that, and I wouldn't for a minute think that we were trying to position this as send children are the issue. That's not the case. I actually think that we should be providing transport for those children who are most in need. But let's remember that in that SEN label, there are a wide range of reasons why children will have an EHCP, and that doesn't always mean that they're not mobile. And I think this comes up in some of the work that we do around EHCPs as well. We've got to remember that we've got to prepare these children for adulthood. When you're an adult, a vehicle won't pull up to your, or for most people, a vehicle won't come and get you and take you to where it needs to be. So I think that's some of what we mean about kind of parental expectations. We've seen a real increase in parents who we've agreed that they're eligible, we want to provide the transport, but they're not comfortable with the type of transport or who else is in the vehicle, or whether or not the child needs somebody accompanying them, and whether that should be the parent or somebody else. And it's really that I was kind of driving at around parental expectations. And I think in some cases, you know, we do need to go back to the premise that in parents are responsible for ensuring their children attend school in the vast majority of cases. The bit around potentially costing more if we close schools. Actually, the reason I said that's not necessarily true is the most expensive vehicles are the smallest ones. The larger the vehicle, in you know, broad terms, the more cost effective it is. And so actually, if you had more children in a larger vehicle being transported, it is likely to be more cost effective. So it won't come out in every single case, but that was the reason that I said it wouldn't necessarily play through that way.
But sorry, if I misunderstood that, but I think that was my point though, was that if more children are having to travel further for school, that in my mind means that there's more smaller vehicles transporting, because
But there'll be parents' vehicles.
there'd be not our vehicles. What I'm saying is, so yeah, it would absolutely be more cost effective to have more buses taking more children in single journeys to places, right? But if we're not able to provide that, and I appreciate the constraints as government, my point is we're going to end up in a very sticky situation down the line, aren't we?
I mean, you're right, but of course, if we have to close a school, children may then become eligible for school transport, hence the bus issue. But either way, there's no perfect solution here, I'm afraid.
And I think that was your point, wasn't it? Yeah, there's that you'll have more children eligible for school transport. So the transport bill will go up, in theory, funded by the school closing. One thing you said, Suzanne, about parental expectations of, you know, it's not the right type of vehicle, who's in it, that sort of thing. What impact is that in terms of cost out of the 4 million? Is that a significant number?
I honestly don't know, Richard. It would actually be really difficult to calculate. Some days it feels like a lot, but I think that's anecdotal.
And I guess that's the reason for, is that we do get a bit, you know, blind by what's happening. Is £4 million is a hell of a lot of money. If 430,000 was being spent by 5 families who insisted on a brand new Volkswagen Caravelle in black with leather seats, I get it. I think the actual issue is, listening to what we've had from Benson and Oliver, is that perhaps education, and I'm trying not to be political, over the last 10, 12 years has been underfunded to a level that we have seen an increase in all sorts of areas we didn't expect to. So whilst I have lots of sympathy for the job you're trying to do, our committee's responsibility is to ask you the questions around how do you make sure the children that need it get it. And I don't have a resolution or a recommendation, really. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, having been a user, as it were, or children have been a user of transport services, I think that you did a very good job, and that's relatively recent. So thank you for that. Second thing is that I am in West Wight. I have parents with children going to the free school, and they've actually had to sort out their own transport for a variety of reasons. And obviously there are details there which you will know about and probably try to deal with. But the third thing is, in West Wight, we have no school between the tip of Totland all the way through to Newport for secondary school pupils. They have to use transport. In my village, you mentioned, oh, it could be as bad as 5 buses a day. That's the best place. 5 villages in my ward, of which several have none. So the issue is that public transport is restricted. So coming back to what the chair was saying, I think it's worth putting forward, if you know, and as he feels fit, to put forward a statement that actually school transport is a major issue for us on the island, and that we would be most grateful if the government, specifically the Department of Education, considered the issues of an island which is very rural and therefore subject to extra costs. Thank you.
I'm assuming that you're already on with that from what I gather. I think you've probably had those conversations already.
Yeah, we do. We do, with due respect. I think that also, of course, there's the negotiations that the chief exec and the leader are leading around the island deal. And I wouldn't want to muddy the waters with that in any way, because clearly that's larger scale. I do think the chair could write to minister, looking at policy determinations being made locally. That might be something. I think there's a growing number of authorities of that view. That might be something, Chair, for you to consider.
Anything else? Transport, no. Oh, Councillor Andre, sorry.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, nobody's actually mentioned active travel. We have, so there are a variety of means, not just road transport, that like the traditional road transport. Of course, now we have not only it's not going to be, I appreciate it's not going to be suitable for everybody, but we have the e-scooters and we also have e-bikes. So there are other ways, and there are healthy ways. There are active travel ways. So I don't want to necessarily make recommendations for this committee, but I think I know the schools are very good at promoting active travel, but there are national campaigns that go on, and perhaps that's something that we could buy into. But certainly I've got an electric bike myself. They are absolutely brilliant.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on, swapping round item 9 and 10, annual complaints report.
Hello. Thank you for having me. So I am the Deputy Head of Service for Information Governance Business Support, but I fulfil the statutory role of Complaints Manager, and that's for Hampshire and Isle of Wight Council. So we are required to produce an annual complaints report annually and formally bring it to you today. So I'm hoping to give a brief overview and just want to confirm some of the context and language in the report, but really want to focus on the good work we've done in the last 12 months and what the next 12 months looks like as well. The data is really important and there's a lot of it in there. Thank you for those that have gone through it all. But I'm really, really keen to focus on the lessons learned from that data and what the data tells us. So hopefully you agree with that, and that's my approach today. So just to clarify then, we have two main complaint processes. Apologies if you know this already, but we have a corporate complaints process and a children's social care complaints process. The Isle of Wight Council maintain the corporate complaints process, and I have no involvement with that in terms of my statutory role as the complaints manager, but it is in the reports because it's very relevant and helpful. And then just to be clear, the children's services statutory complaints I'm responsible for as the complaints manager within the report. The local government and social care ombudsman are the kind of the body that oversee this process, and again, their involvement is in the report in terms of what they've been involved with. So last year's report, I'm sure you all remember me coming last year as a highlight, but last year I talked a lot about the service being under pressure. I talked about high caseloads, things being beyond timescales, and you had some really robust questions for me, which was well received. I talked to you about the plan that was in place to resolve that, and I'm really pleased to be coming to you 12 months later saying that that plan was a success. We're in a really good place now, and that the plan went as predicted, but we were able to progress it quicker than we'd hoped. So the financial year was the deadline, but actually by December 2022, we were back in a really good place and processing complaints as we should be within our statutory timeframe. So that's really good news, and I hope the report displays that well. You'll hear the report talk a lot about representations. Just to be clear to you, a representation can be anything. It can be a complaint, but it can also be just a general query that we happen to have received. So generally, a representation will trigger about 5 actions per thing. So it can be anything from a really serious complaint that takes months and legal action, or it can be, I've got a complaint about Southampton Council, that's not for us, go to them. It really can be at one extreme to the other. So the report says there's an increase of 37% in terms of representations. I just want to give some context to that. That's really an increase from 83 to 114. So it's 31 representations. 37% can sound quite alarming, but just to reassure you. There's a really important context to that, though. There's been a service demand increase, a significant one. So we've seen an increase of 15% in the social care space, and that's going from 14,000 to 16,000 cases. That's a really big increase. So that 31% increase comes from that context. And taking it even further, if you look at those 16,000 cases, of the complaints, the representations we've had, it's 0.3%. Okay, so it's a tiny little segment. And if you actually consider that each case has many, many touch points to it as well, you'll have duplicate complaints from individuals in there as well. So that percentage will keep going down and down and down. So in terms of segment of cases, it's very tiny. Parents continue to be the highest complainers. The process, it's fair to say, was built or designed for children to complain, but parents continue to be there with 63%, and then grandparents 12%. So 75% are adults and parents, grandparents. And the report, I hope, gives details of what those complaints are, and I'm really happy to kind of go into the detail if anyone has any queries. So in terms of actions taken then, there's many, and I won't go through all of them, but the key ones really, we've right-sized our team to be better at handling the quantity that's coming in. And that includes complaints officers, admin support, but also investigators to look at complaints as well. We found some really good efficiencies in the team. And the main focus really was that we were consistent and we can really work at pace, because I'm sure everyone will know that when you make a complaint, a quick resolution is always in everyone's interest. I've personally been doing a lot of training as well with colleagues around both councils. It included many things, but generally the biggest change we made was to give a strength-based approach. Now, believe it or not, prior to, I guess I'd say sort of October, November, end of last year, we were responding to all complaints in writing. I understand why that decision was made. It's an audit trail. It's very corporate, but it wasn't really working. It wasn't the best way to approach this. So we introduced an insistence that we call a meet complainants when they make complaints. And the success of this has been beyond what I could have even predicted, to be honest with you. It's been very successful. Adding that human element, seeing the whites of someone's eyes has really, really helped. We've also removed language like telling someone their complaint's not upheld. It's very emotive. It's very triggering. So we found ways to say we don't agree with your complaint in a much more human way that can accept their feeling, accept how the impact they've had, but maybe not take the blame in that way. So just to give you an idea of how successful it's been, of all the escalations that go to the next stages, so the ones that go beyond the first stage, 18% of those are handled by phone or meeting, but the vast majority of the rest are just written responses. And we can see that straight away there, that the power in those phone calls and in those interactions with people. Also, we've reduced the reason that people escalate, because we collect this data when people do that. A common theme prior to this change was that people's complaints were being misunderstood. They were getting long written responses, which we spent a lot of time writing, but it was well off the mark. It wasn't what people were complaining about. So by being able to speak to people, we're getting right to the nub of the issue, and it's again proven really successful. We also introduced what we call callback requests. So when someone goes to make a complaint, we often had feedback that actually if they just felt they couldn't speak to somebody, they just wanted to speak to somebody. They didn't really want to complain. They were dissatisfied, but they just wanted to speak to somebody. So what we've done is with our e-form, when someone goes through our website, they'll click complaints, they'll start putting the information in. So they've really got that intent to complain. We interrupt them and we say, are you sure you wish to complain? Would you rather speak to a human, a manager, the relevant person to discuss your dissatisfaction? This won't be a formal complaint. It'll just be a discussion, and then you can complain in the future if you wish. And again, that's proven really successful. So of all the submissions we've had, 40% of people have gone down that path. So that's 40% of complaints we've reduced. And then of those, 13% become complaints. So there's a really high conversion rate or very low conversion rate rather of complaints, which again, really good progress. So onto the lessons learned then. There's a few in there. Again, I'm happy to take questions if people want to pull specific ones out. But the main theme running through the complaints is communication. And that's quite an all-encompassing category. So to break it down, a lot of the complaints, or enough of note, are individuals without parental responsibility making a complaint. So that might be grandparents as an example. They haven't got direct parental responsibility. They're very invested in the children's outcomes and they wish to complain. Often they might not have relationships with the parents, but they'll have involvement from the sidelines. They're really difficult, you can imagine, difficult things to deal with. We can't give them all the information they want, but we try and resolve those complaints the best we can. Non-resident parents as well. So we've had accusations of where maybe children might live with dad or live with just mum. The other parent feels slightly out of the loop. So it's about involving them a lot more as well. And then also that was those are both Hampshire and Isle of Wight specific, but for Isle of Wight only, the accusations of sort of nepotism or conflicts of interest do come up enough. You'll all know why, because you live on a small island, and the sort of degree of separation is much smaller. And just to be really clear, when we get these kind of accusations, we investigate them very thoroughly. And there's never in this report, never been any suggestion, anything like that is going on. However, there's a perception of it, and that in itself is a lesson to be learned. So one of the recommendations that is in the report is a communication strategy to take all of this into account, to think about how we can reassure people, how we can really intervene early with non-resident parents, with those without PR, to really set out a communication strategy of some kind. And in terms of Isle of Wight recommendations, I've spoken to senior managers about how staff within the council know the policy on conflict of interest really well. You ask any of them, they'll say it off by heart. They know the process really well. But let's try and remove that perception by maybe putting something publicly on the website about the approaches the council take, etc., is a recommendation. I think it would be remiss of us not to build upon that strength-based approach and how powerful it's been, calling people, speaking to people. So again, a recommendation is that we can roll this out across as many services as possible and build upon the strength of children's services where we can. And then finally, really, the only other communication element that came up was when social workers changed. So we know, I won't go into the detail of retention of social workers, etc., because that's for other people around me to talk about. But when social workers do change, which does happen, we need to be really clear about that happening. Feedback was often that they heard about the social worker changing when the new social worker introduced himself, which is not ideal. And we really want to include that in our communication strategy where we can. So I'll just finish by saying that a lot of this report is a combination of Hampshire and Isle of Wight data, because I think a lot of the themes are similar and the same. That conflict of interest one's really very specific to Isle of Wight. But that's my summary, and I'd invite any questions from anybody if you have any.
Thank you. Lots of detail as you'd expect. I remember last year's very clearly, and at the time being very, very impressed then, and again impressed this year. So you've actually done everything you said, and I think you remember I asked you if you had a magic wand, what would you do? And you were very clear, and it looks like you have employed the magic wand. I will ask you that question again in a minute, but I will ask you. Very interested in the meeting people face-to-face element. Has it changed outcomes at all?
Yeah. So I think from a complaints point of view, it's reduced escalation, which is helpful for everybody. I think if you look at the report, a lot of the complaints are resolved with just an apology or an explanation. We're not forking out lots of money. We're not putting different services in place. We're really just holding our hands up and accepting something by apologizing. And that's so much more easily done face to face. That empathy, that sincerity comes through much easier. I think that's helped. But I think as well, when you're involved in children's services or anything, legislation, policy is very complex. And it's very much an unknown to parents. So the ability to just sit with a professional and have something explained to you in itself helps with the outcome. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, but it's for all those reasons. Yeah.
Any questions before I go on to the magic wand question? Councillor Downer.
Well, thank you, Chairman, but I'll just like to sort of not harping on about what you just said, but it's refreshing to see that you're going to the old-fashioned way, back to basics, speaking to people, because then they feel valued. Thank you, Chairman.
So you're going to a bit longer then. I've got a mouthful of water still. Sorry, Councillor Outlaw. Thank you.
You know me, I'm always right to the point and brief. So
You
there
are,
you
I mean,
go.
much
Thank you.
appreciated. Much appreciated. Councillor Outlaw.
Thank you. Could you just clarify to me, not being in education or in children's services myself, is what you actually mean by a strength-based approach.
Yeah, of course. It really is that human interaction. It's that speaking to individuals. It's creating, I guess I define it as creating very clear actions and objectives from an interaction. So something you can tangibly measure, something you can take away from you. It really, if you were speaking to social workers, what they base a lot, and there's social workers around me, qualified social workers, they base a lot of their interactions around that. A lot of their training is based on strength-based approach. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Councillor Andre.
Sorry, and if I can just add to that, the strengths-based approach focuses on what people are doing well. So it's about not playing the blame game. It's focusing on the strengths and building on the strengths.
Any further questions? Oh, you're doing well. Next year there'll be no questions at all. I will ask the magic one question. What's next?
Oh, loads of money? I don't know. It's a really hard question. Last year that was a really easy question because it was very easy to tangible. I think the magic wand would be an education piece for people we interact with, and that's a really difficult thing. I think if in a perfect world, when we go into someone's lives, because most people don't want to be involved with social care, it's fair to say. I think an ability to educate those people and individuals as to what to expect and what's legislation versus what's policy, etc., would be fantastic. I think giving someone insight into all that stuff would help. It empowers them, but it also makes our lives a bit easier. That would be my magic wand. I'll probably say the same thing next year if you asked me, to be honest, though, because
if I could have a wish, it would be that children complained more. Because it's the parents, it's the adults, and actually I really do want to hear from children sometimes to understand their experience, and not just teenagers, but young children as well, that we intervene in their lives.
That is a very good point, actually, and I won't labour it, but it's going back to your meeting people face to face. Is we do really need to give agency to young people. I joke about you paying our pensions, but you know you're going to be the adults. You're going to be people doing these jobs in not too many years' time. We do need to give you agency as soon as possible. Thank you. Any other comments? Any other questions? No. Thank you. Well done. That was excellent. Thank you. So on to item 9, Isle of Wight Start for Life and Family Hub programme.
Thank you. So myself and Carly are going to present on this. You've got a presentation in your pack, which is more of an extended presentation. We have slimmed down what we're presenting today because we're aware of the heat and everyone's stuck in a stuffy room. So, but we're really happy to ask any questions. And we've also got a note to come back on some of the points that Benson and Ollie were talking about around our community capacity grant process, which is separate to what we're presenting on, but we'll try and tag it onto the end, if that's okay. So I'm Sophie Butt. I'm an area director in Children's Services with oversight of the Family Hub programme, and Carly is going to be presenting for us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Carly Bain, and I'm the Service Manager for Early Help, Family Hubs and Supporting Families. And as Sophia said, I'm here to give you a sort of whistle-stop tour of the Start for Life and Family Hub programme, and just obviously with a focus on an overview of what's happening on the island. So a question that some of you will know the answer to in the room and some of you won't. What are family hubs? There are reams and reams of things online that will tell you what family hubs are, but in a nutshell, it's a one-stop shop for expectant families and families that have children and young people up to the age of 19 and up to the age of 25 for young people living with special educational needs and disabilities. And obviously you can see the description in there, which comes straight from the National Centre for Family Hubs. It's a single access point to integrated family support services for early help. So we're talking prevention. So as soon as things arise for families, before things escalate, that sort of universal and early help provision. And it's help with social, emotional, physical and financial needs. So again, thinking about that one-stop shop, it's anything and everything that parents, carers, children and young people can access. We often work with the central government team, and how they describe it is if you went to Tesco's, you'd go there to get your milk and your bread, but you'd go to your family hub if you needed housing support, debt release, substance use support, anything and everything really. And it's underpinned by three key principles, which is access, connection, and relationships. So it's thinking about, again, touching on the things that James had said, it's building on strengths and existing relationships. It's about community resilience, so families access resources within their communities, and it's about connecting families. So families know where to go to access support, and professionals know how to signpost them to that support. So in terms of the programme itself, back in 2021, as part of the Levelling Up agenda, the government committed £300 million to establishing and then developing family hubs across the country for half of the local authorities in the UK. And based on income deprivation, the Isle of Wight were one of the 75 pre-selected local authorities. So we signed up to that programme last year, and we were successful in not only securing that, but becoming one of 14 trailblazing local authorities. So it's something for us to be really proud of. We sit amongst the best local authorities in the country that are trailblazing the acceleration of our family hubs. And I know, Councillor Andre, you've been heavily involved in some of the work that we've been doing there. So I just want to give you a sort of high level overview of what we're currently looking at. So this programme is only a short programme. It only runs until March 25, and there was a 10-month delay due to delays in government on this programme starting. So we're just getting started really, I guess. But our current focus is looking at rebranding and relaunching family hubs. So many of you will know your family centres. Some of you still may know them as children's centres. So as part of my portfolio, I manage that contract for all of those children's centres. And what we're looking to do is to rebrand and reinvest and build on those foundations. So bring back in resources and try and pull together a cross-sector support for those children and families within those centres. But it's also really important to mention that actually we're building on this, but it's a blended approach. So it's not just about the physical spaces, and it's not just about the family and children's centres and the family hubs. This is about all of the other community spaces, which is why I was really interested in Oliver and Benson's presentation earlier, because actually this is about where are the spaces that families are going and how can that be part of the family hub network. So it doesn't mean that, for example, youth provision has to run out of a family centre or a family hub. It might be that Sway or Network Ride become part of the partnership there. So we just bring all of that together. And that's all really being done in terms of our governance structure and everything that we revised at the start of the programme. So we have those voluntary sector and youth provision providers on our governance to make sure that we include all of that as we move forward. So we're just doing the rebranding and relaunch of our three main family hubs. So that is they are the children and family centres in Newport, so the East Newport one, also in Ryde, and also we're looking at Sandown, and the additional sites we will be doing some investment work in those as well. But the reason we have definition of hubs in those three areas is because they are in our greatest statistical areas of need. And in order to meet the definition of a family hub, we have to have capacity to be able to offer a drop-in resource from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And so we're able to do that in three of those buildings. And I think it's really important to mention, because I know lots of people ask about the children's centres, family centres, and the capacity and the way in which we run the programmes from them. But actually, what's been recognised nationally from the D4E is that we have, considering our population and the size of the Isle of Wight, to have three functioning hubs is really something that they don't see very often. So we're very lucky to have our additional family centres, so our spoke sites as well. We want to build on those. But actually, in terms of our population and size, that's really good to have those three hubs. So we're now live with our Start for Life publication, and just to sort of clarify that point really, the programme is called Start for Life and Family Hubs, but Start for Life is really where the government are investing the funding, and that is the 1,001 critical days. So from the minute a parent expects a baby until a toddler turns 2, that's around 1,001 days. And so there's a lot of investment in supporting our expectant and new parents. So we are producing a digital offer that sits within our family information hub to be able to support families digitally, to signpost them to what's going on in their local hubs. And we're very much promoting this as a whole island initiative. So it doesn't matter where you live, you are able to access resources in any of those hubs and any of that digital offer. We recently, at the end of June, had a ministerial visit from Dame Andrea Leadsom and her team. Councillor Andre was present. And again, that was because we were one of the trailblazing local authorities, and we received really positive feedback around the way that we're working in partnership and the work that we're producing. And we're also one of just 6 local authorities, just a few weeks ago actually, to be part of Start for Life thematic review. And that piece of work is really important in terms of informing future inspections around Start for Life provisions. What are new and expectant parents accessing and how are they accessing it? And so it was really good to be part of that 2-day review, which was undertaken by 3 inspectors. We did lots of work with them about sort of what we need from central government moving forward and what are the benefits of this, and also what are the challenges of this programme. And then the other 2 boxes that you can see on the screen, we're really just focusing on what we call the core strands, which I'll cover briefly in a second, but also that wider network. So again, linking in with Oliver and Benson's presentation and some of the things you've talked about today. So although the programme heavily funds the Start for Life offer, going back to that one-stop shop analogy, you know, we're thinking about anything and everything for families. So it's whatever happens in terms of, you know, whatever support we need, we're going to really try and bring in that cross-sector support and make sure that everyone's views are captured and making sure that this network becomes as wide as it possibly can. So in terms of the core strands, these are what the government recognises funded strands. So this is basically what we're getting funding for. So you'll see in the first column there, the strand and the name of the strand, and then you'll see on the right-hand column, the lead. So as a local authority, we coordinate and we're responsible for reporting back to the Department for Education, making sure that we're on budget, that we deliver the outcomes in our delivery plan, and we work very closely with them. But as you can see, and as I'm sure you can appreciate, as a local authority, we're not best placed to be able to deliver infant feeding support in the maternity wards. So you can see that obviously there's a real breadth of partnership working here. And actually some of those core strand leads are our partners that are working in conjunction with us. So for example, you know, for infant feeding support, we knew it wasn't just about midwives, it's also about health visitors, because as soon as that baby's born, they're going to need the health visiting support as well. And we've also got Bernardo's who are doing a lot of breastfeeding and infant feeding support working on that. So there's a lot of co-production and a lot of work going on in partnership. And as a board, a delivery plan board, we meet every 2 weeks to discuss the progress and make sure we're on track. I think it's also worth just briefly mentioning as well, the parent carer panels are being run. We went out to tender for this by Aspire in Ride. And what we really wanted to do was find a localised group that are working with families that may not currently be accessing our family centres to find out why. So what are the barriers there? How can we bring them in? So that was a piece of work that we did that, again, the government sort of upheld as an example of good practice in terms of going out and reaching out to our voluntary sector. So I know many of you will know this, but these are our current family centre hub sites. What we are going to do is obviously we're doing the rebranding at the moment, so you'll see there where all of the sites are, and where there's a real focus and investment and commitment from us to look at the spoke sites, which we will call family centres, and we'll have the family hub branding, but looking at how we can further offer communities to be able to use those spaces. So we're really interested in that, and hopefully some of you will hear from us if you haven't heard already about that work. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. And if you've got any questions, we'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you. Lots of information there and lots of information. Thank you very much. And, you know, well done for the ministerial visit. Forgetting my politics, well done. It must have been quite a day for you. Do we have any questions at all? Councillor Allen.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could explain to me what a spoke site would look like.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a good question. So as we've said, in terms of budget, what we really need to think about is obviously sustainability moving forward. And so the baseline budget means that we can only really have those 3 hubs. But what we want to look at is increasing our cohort for with the voluntary sector to be able to have our partners working out of those spoke sites. So they will be sites that don't have the drop-in facility Monday to Friday 9 to 5 that is manned by us as the local authority, but actually it may be something that our partners will be able to contribute to. So we're reaching out to partners to say, you know, town and parish councils, any of our partners working in communities to say, if you would like your spoke sites, your family centres to be open more, we are happy to work with you to be able to make sure that you can safely and appropriately use those spaces, look at, you know, how that works, but to try and keep those spaces open. So the spoke sites are basically the ones that we can't provide capacity to be able to facilitate the drop-in, unfortunately. So we're not, in terms of the programme requirements, we're not able to call those family hubs because we don't have that. But the other thing I think is really important, and again, just sort of looking at Oliver and Benson really, is we don't just want organisations to co-locate, we want them to work together where there's a good sort of appropriate space and timetable. So for example, in an ideal world, we'd love youth provision to have a sexual health worker there, a mental health worker there, a youth provision working. So it's a challenge for us to be able to try and find the right services working at the right time in the same space. But again, that's the beauty of the digital offer that will hopefully enhance that.
So I'll come to you, Councillor Stewart. Sorry, I cut you off mid-flow, as it were.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point really. I think the council and members should be really proud of this programme. We're really proud of the achievements of Carly and her team and Sophie, because they've driven this work, and it's been a long-term success on the island. Early intervention, the relationship with Bernardo's, but this is really the forefront nationally now of the work in this area, and it's being led and driven by the Isle of Wight. So, kudos for the island. Thank you.
Indeed. Councillor Lever.
Thanks, Chair. I also have to echo what Stuart's just said, and leading on from what Councillor Outlaw's just asked is, are there plans to increase the spoke sites at the moment?
I mean, the funding obviously is only until March 25, and we need to look, and it's something I say 25 times a day at least, is about sustainability. And we need, and I've said it from day one, we need the third sector. We need our voluntary faith and community sectors to be on board with this. Otherwise, we just won't sustain it in the way that we're trying to create it now. So that's really important. What we're looking to do is look at other corporate spaces, such as libraries, and different spaces that we can use to be able to sort of develop that family hub network. So again, we know that we'll only ever have 3 hubs at the moment, and we know that we'll have our spoke sites, which we will name family centres. We just always have referred to them as spoke sites, but they'll be known as family centres. But then we also, as part of the branding and comms, have developed partnership family hub kind of logos and comms and things. And so what we would like is network ride or community cafes, libraries, corporate, non-corporate spaces to become part of that network. So there will be training and obviously some governance around that, but we're happy to look at community spaces that want to become part of that network. And that's the whole point really, is that you start small with your initial kind of corporate buildings and you build out into what's going on for children and families. So yeah.
Just coming back to that, that's really good to hear. Is there anything that we as a committee or just as individual councillors can do to help that? And also, have you engaged with town and parish councils about that? Could they be involved with setting up spokes? Because I'm thinking of Newport. We've got, not that you would need another Newport site at this point, but we've got the 64 High Street now, and there's 3 shoplets in there that we kind of engage with different community organisations that would be in there. So that feels like it could be potentially be in the future a nice spot for something like that.
Absolutely. We are really interested, and I've got a small team with me, but actually if anyone wants to contact me about, and reach out around community spaces, you said about Newport and it's kind of, we've got enough space. We haven't. We've got 2, so we've got our hub site in East Newport, which is renamed Family Hub Newport, and then we've got our West Newport site, which will be renamed as Family Centre Carisbrooke. But actually, just thinking again about youth provision, for example, what we know to be a barrier so far potentially is that a lot of our young people see the family centres currently as spaces for younger children and parents and families. And so actually we're really interested in those alternative spaces that might suit youth provisions better. So yeah, really interested in all of that. And again, Sophie mentioned it, but in terms of community capacity granting, as part of the portfolio of work that I do, my team manager Kelly Quinn reaches out to town and parish councils, so some of you may know her already, for small community capacity grants. And our next round in October, the focus is around perinatal mental health and mental health for expectant parents and new parents and youth services. So again, if you're interested in those small community capacity grants, then that's something that we can support with. And we, at the moment, run two rounds of grants a year.
What would Benson and Oliver need to do to show interest in those community grants?
Pardon, sorry?
What would Benson and Oliver need to do to access
It would,
it?
so it would have to come from, ideally from, obviously from professionals and from town and parish councils that make those applications. So I can certainly follow up with any further information, but certainly I see Oliver and Benson being able to have discussions with those town and parish councils making those bids to see what they would use that money for and what would be best place to use it for.
So you've got the terminology now. Give them some stick. Just one thing about the funding ending in March 25. What level of funding do you think is required to keep it going? Because this does, as Stuart says, you know, this is a fantastic success. My concern is that we just let a success fizzle out into nothing.
I think, I'm sure Stuart will definitely come in on this one. Sustainability is really important. I had a meeting today with WIFRI and we said, actually, how are you going to sustain this past March 25? And they're already starting to look at evidence base and the impact of that for that. But we've got challenges everywhere. Part of the thematic review was to be able to influence and say what we need moving forward. But yeah, it's absolutely a challenge. Stuart, I don't know if you want to come in terms of money, but
Always got things to say about money. The reality is that the council receives no direct grant funding for early help. It doesn't get anything. The only money that's available is through the supporting families programme, which, you know, is good, but actually it's ring fenced and it's not flexible enough. So as always, there's the ask of government, where's the money for local authorities to do early intervention? That aside, I think there are opportunities within the council. So what can adults bring to these hubs, because they are family hubs? So, you know, what more can public health bring? And they do bring some money already. And then, of course, it's about the NHS and it's about businesses as well. So how do we tap into all of that? Because these, if you look at the future and say, these are proper family hubs and they are centres for communities, then actually everybody's got a role to play in it. So that's, it sounds quite grandiose that it's not, it's just about bringing partners together, but we mustn't forget the business sector in this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Stewart.
I unfortunately am rather old now. So I remember 20 odd years ago when we had a similar scheme and eventually, unfortunately, that got torpedoed. And my wife was my wife at the time, was my first wife, should I add here. She's run away to another country, apparently. But one of the key issues, we won't go into that. One of the key issues was obviously that it was very much a partnership approach of bringing midwives, NHS professionals, and all of the sort of community as far as possible. And to hear what you're doing is a lovely echo of what I saw happening then. And the chair has focused on one of the key issues, which is how do we make it sustainable? And I think we should emphasize in some way that notwithstanding all the other partners that we might have, without government funding of some sort, can it continue?
Not in its current form. I have to be realistic here. You know, come 2025, if there's not some additional funding and there's not proper buy-in from partners, then no. Don't forget the offer we had before this was still good, which is what led to us becoming a trailblazer in the first place. So even without that, the current investment from the council, it was a really good offer and something to be proud of. It's just gone to another level now. And we keep, you're right going back 20 years because we keep going around in a full circle, don't we? You know, when I heard about this, I thought, surely these are children's centres by another name. Have I got it wrong? And in fact, they are. I think there's a recognition, isn't there, across all politicians, Whitehall, Westminster, that actually early intervention is the key to reducing costs on services and actually improving outcomes earlier for families. So watch this space.
Anything else? Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Sophie. That's excellent. Moving on, work plan. I know you all poured over the work plan like you do over the last few weeks. Nothing I can spot to move or change other than December's youth services, and you'll remember why we highlighted that now, won't you? You'll remind me why we were concerned about that. If not, we won't worry about it. I think it was whether it stayed there, but unless anybody's got any issues with it, I think it was about whether it was too early in terms of provision. Anything anybody wants to add, move? This stage is fairly full programme. Okay, we're happy with that. Members' questions then. Any other questions other than the ones you've already asked? No repeats, no points for that. Any questions at all? Fantastic. Well, thank you. I know it's all part of your job, but I do appreciate the late night it causes for you. So thank you all for attending and thank you everyone else.